She'll sign anything if you rush her." Those words didn't sound like they were meant for me, yet they sliced through the hallway door as plainly as if my daughter-in-law had whispered them into my ear. I froze with my fingertips still on the receipt I'd been folding. At 78, my hearing had softened, but cruelty still arrived crisp and clear. I stood very still, as I often had in life, hoping silence would make the world kinder. It never did. Tammy's voice floated on, low and efficient, the way people speak when they believe the subject cannot object. "Just hand her the papers with the sticky notes. She won't read them. She never does." I felt something tighten inside my chest, an old wire, stretched for years, finally pulling taut. I stepped back from the half-closed office door before they could see me. The sound of papers rustling, a pen tapping, my son's nervous chuckle. All of it blended into a single truth I had spent years avoiding. They weren't just careless. They were comfortable. Comfortable assuming I would nod, smile, and sign whatever they placed in front of me. Comfortable thinking an old woman's hands shake too much to hold a boundary. I walked toward the kitchen, slowly, because dignity walks slower in old age, but it still walks. The kettle was still warm from the tea I'd made earlier. I touched it anyway, needing a moment to feel something steady beneath my hand. Outside, the afternoon sun lay over the garden like a faded quilt. Soft, worn, familiar. The kind of beauty I once believed was enough to keep a family gentle. But people grow, and sometimes they grow sharper. My voice didn't shake when I called out, "Tammy, darling, I'm stepping out for some air. If Andrew needs me, he can call." "Oh, sure," she answered too brightly. "No rush, Mom." No rush. If only they knew how that word tasted to a woman who had spent decades being hurried into silence. I slipped on my cardigan, the blue one with stretched elbows, and stepped onto the porch. The boards complained under my weight. George always meant to fix them, but died before he could. I still talk to him sometimes on this porch, not out loud, just quietly, in the way widows do, between heartbeats. "Did you hear that, love?" I murmured, settling into the old rocking chair. "Apparently I sign anything." The wind stirred the maple leaves, offering no contradiction. A part of me wished I could be shocked. But the truth is, life doesn't suddenly turn cruel at 78. It simply stops hiding. The small slights, the rushed signatures, the documents they said were just housekeeping, the way Tammy always guided me to the last page without explaining the first. Today, it all aligned, like beads sliding into place on a string. I looked at my hands. Thin, spotted, but steady. Steadier than they gave them credit for. Andrew used to hold these same hands when he was little, pressing my fingers to his cheek when he couldn't fall asleep. I never imagined there would come a day when he would flinch at my slowness or sigh when I asked a second question. But life had a way of making strangers inside one house. From inside, I heard the faint thud of a drawer closing. Tammy's voice again, soft, intentional. "Just bring her the signature page. Tell her we're late." Late. Always late. People like Tammy lived as if slowness were a flaw, not a form of wisdom. I closed my eyes for a long breath. The sun warmed my knees. The chair creaked beneath me. Everything about the moment was ordinary, except for the new, unfamiliar stillness growing inside me. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't anger. It was clarity. For the first time in years, I realized I didn't have to hurry for anyone. When the screen door opened behind me, I didn't turn. "Mom?" Andrew called, papers rustling in his hand. "Can I grab your signature real quick?" Real quick. I opened my eyes and let the rocking chair come to a full, deliberate stop. "No," I said softly. "Not today." He blinked, confused. Tammy hovered behind him, surprised I'd heard. I stood, leaning on the railing. Not because I needed to, but because people underestimate a woman who rises slowly. "I won't be signing anything," I continued, "until I've had time. My time." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. Not for them. And for the first time in a long, long while, not for me either. Andrew didn't say anything at first. He wasn't used to silence coming from me. For years, I had filled every pause with reassurance, every discomfort with softness. But now the stillness belonged to me, and he didn't know what to do with it. "I just need your signature, Mom," he repeated, more carefully this time. "It's routine." Routine. That word carried more weight than he realized. Routine was how you boil a frog without it noticing, 1 degree at a time. I said no, I answered, and stepped past him toward the kitchen door. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, Tammy's work. She always cleaned before asking for money, said it made her feel helpful. I had once found it endearing. Now I saw it for what it was: packaging. I set my cardigan over the dining chair. My heart beat a little too loud in the quiet room, but it wasn't fear. It was something older, more deliberate. A woman doesn't reach 78 without learning that trembling and breaking are not the same thing. Behind me, Andrew followed, his steps stiff. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "Tammy and I are handling a lot right now. We just need this done. It's timing." That word again. Timing. Rush her. She'll sign anything. I moved to the sink and turned on the tap just long enough to wash the teacup waiting there. My hands stayed steady, even under the warm stream. I dried it slowly. "You've brought me documents 4 times this month," I said, still looking at the cup. "And every time you said the same thing: quick, routine, don't worry." Andrew exhaled sharply, the kind of breath people take when they've been found out, but aren't ready to admit it. "Mom, it's nothing serious." "I'll decide that," I replied. That sentence startled him. I could hear it in the way his breath caught. I wasn't harsh, but I wasn't soft either. I simply spoke as someone who remembered she had a spine. Tammy entered then, pretending surprise. "Oh, Mrs. Collins, we didn't expect you to escalate things." She smiled, thin as paper. "We're on a tight schedule. If we could just get the signature written, Andrew and I can finish the rest." "Finish what rest?" I didn't ask. Not yet. Their urgency told me more than their words ever would. "I'm not signing anything today," I said again, drying the last cup. "Leave the papers." Tammy's smile faltered. "But you'll forget." "You always forget." Andrew winced at her choice of words. I watched them exchange a quick, nervous look, one I'd seen before but never truly understood until now. That quiet agreement between two people who believe they've outgrown the obstacle standing in front of them. The obstacle being me. "I'll remember," I said, folding the dish towel neatly. "I remember more than you think." I felt their eyes on my back as I walked into the living room. The late afternoon light fell across the carpet in pale strips, catching dust in the air. Dust never bothered me. Only people did. My chair, George's old chair, was waiting for me, the fabric worn to the shape of his broad shoulders. I lowered myself into it, slowly, letting my bones settle. Aging had taught me that rushing was a young person's disease. "Mom," Andrew's voice was tight, "we really need this done today." "No," I repeated, meeting his gaze at last. You need me to stop asking questions. He dropped his eyes. Tammy huffed, arms crossed. This is ridiculous. Ah, there she was, the woman underneath the polished voice. I studied her face quietly. She was younger than Andrew by 6 years, but life had hardened her early. Beautiful, yes, but the kind of beauty that sharpens its own edges. When she first married my son, I thought she simply wanted stability. Now I saw she wanted leverage. Leave the papers, I said again. I'd rather not, Tammy muttered. I wasn't asking what you'd rather, I replied. The silence that followed was heavy, but not painful. Not for me. I had carried far heavier things in my life. Grief, disappointment, the long, slow loneliness of widowhood. Their discomfort felt light by comparison. Andrew finally placed the manila folder on the coffee table. Fine, look it over, he said. Just don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. Complicated. Another word from their shared vocabulary of polite manipulation. They left soon after, Tammy striding out first, Andrew following with an apologetic glance he didn't quite commit to. The car doors slammed. The engine started. The driveway gravel crunched beneath their tires. And then the house was mine again. Quiet. Still. Honest. I pulled the folder toward me. It felt too heavy for its size. Inside were 3 documents, each marked with bright orange sticky notes pointing to where I should sign, as if I couldn't read, or as if reading was the last thing they wanted me to do. My hands hovered over the top page. Then I closed the folder. Not out of fear, out of intention. Whatever this was, whatever shape their plan had taken, I would not discover it by candlelight at my kitchen table. Tomorrow, I decided, I would take the papers where they belonged, to someone who wouldn't rush me. Tomorrow, I would see a lawyer, and I would go alone. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of fear. Fear keeps you awake with noise, and what I felt was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that comes when something finally stops pretending to be fine. The folder lay on the coffee table like an accusation. Its sharp corners pointed at me every time I passed the room. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. Whatever waited inside deserved better eyes than mine. Eyes that wouldn't soften, because the hands behind the papers belonged to my son. When morning came, I took my time getting ready. I combed my thinning hair, pinned it the way George always liked, and put on the gray wool coat I saved for church and doctor appointments. The hem brushed my calves as I walked, steadying me like a hand on the small of my back. Outside, the air smelled of frost and damp leaves. My knees complained as I stepped off the porch, but pain at my age is a familiar companion, one that doesn't apologize but also doesn't surprise. I locked the door, dropped the key into my purse, and walked to the bus stop. I could have asked Andrew to drive me, of course. The old version of me might have. But this morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. The pleasure of doing something without permission. The bus arrived late, wheezing like a tired horse. The driver nodded when I climbed aboard. I sat near the window, pressed my palm to the cool glass, and watched the town roll past. The bakery where George used to buy cinnamon rolls on Saturdays, the hardware store where Andrew had worked as a teenager, the corner lot where the old oak tree was struck by lightning the year I turned 50. The world changes whether you approve or not. I got off 5 blocks from downtown, where the law offices sat between a dentist and a shop that sold overpriced candles. A younger woman might have hurried. I didn't. At 78, you learn the value of arriving with breath still in your lungs. The brass plaque on the door read, Mayer and Holt, Attorneys at Law. Professional enough to comfort, small enough to be honest. Inside, the receptionist looked up from her computer, startled by my slowness. People always assume frailty where there is only caution. "Good morning," she said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'd like to see someone today, if possible." Her eyes softened. Pity, not warmth. I let it slide. "Is it urgent?" "Yes," I answered. "And no, it's overdue." While she checked availability, I sat in a soft leather chair near the window. The office smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Real paper, not the glossy kind my daughter-in-law liked to wave around. On the far wall hung photographs of the partners shaking hands with judges and smiling at fundraisers. I studied them carefully. Finally, a door opened, and a man in his late 40s stepped out. Dark suit, tired eyes, kind mouth. "Mrs. Collins?" he asked. "I'm Daniel Holt." "Come on in." His office was warm, not just temperature, but atmosphere. Books lined the shelves, thick and well used. A small pot of ivy drooped over the edge of a filing cabinet. He gestured to a chair. "What brings you in today?" I placed the manila folder in front of him. "My son wants me to sign these," I said. "My daughter-in-law said something yesterday that made me think I should stop rushing." He opened the folder, skimmed the first page, and went very still. "Did you read any of this?" he asked gently. "No, I thought you might read it better." He tilted the pages toward the light. "This is not routine paperwork, Mrs. Collins." I folded my hands in my lap, waiting. "It appears," he said slowly, "to grant your son financial decision-making authority over your property, including your home. My home." He tapped the second page. "This one initiates a process to transfer partial interest in the property to them, possibly with the aim of refinancing or future sale." "And the third?" I asked. He hesitated. "It limits your ability to reverse the first two without their approval." Ah, that explained Tammy's urgency. Holt looked up at me, eyebrows raised in a way that suggested he expected panic. I didn't panic. That surprised him. "Mrs. Collins, are you aware of the implications?" "I am now." He nodded slowly, as if adjusting his expectations. "Do you recall signing any similar documents before?" I leaned back, the chair creaking softly under my weight. "I recall being hurried." His jaw tightened. Not in anger at me, but on my behalf. He set the papers aside. "We can stop any further action, but we'll need to establish what authority your son already has." Authority. What a polite way to say, "What have they taken while you trusted them?" He asked a few more questions. "Did Andrew handle any of my bills? Did I ever sign a general power of attorney? Did they have access to my accounts?" I answered honestly, even when the truth stung. When we finished, he folded his hands and leaned forward. "You're not in immediate danger," he said, "but you were close. Very close." I felt the weight of that settle in my ribs, like a stone sinking through water. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "For today? Don't sign anything." He slid the folder back to me. "And let me look deeper into your records." I closed the folder carefully. For years, I had treated paperwork like a chore. Now it felt like a battlefield. "Mr. Holt," I said softly, "I'm an old woman. They think that makes me easy to manage." He offered a sad smile. "Mrs. Collins, I've met many old women. None of them were easy." I stood, slower than I wanted, but tall enough. "Then let's give them a surprise." When I stepped outside, the air felt sharper, like the world had teeth again. But for the first time in a long while, I felt my own teeth, too, and they were not dull. The walk home from the lawyer's office felt longer than it truly was. Not because my legs tired, they always tired, but because the world suddenly looked different, as though each street lamp, each hedge, each crack in the sidewalk held a quiet question. How long have you been letting them rush you, Marta? I didn't have an answer, or rather, the answer was too simple to be spoken aloud. It had been happening slowly, gently, for years, until yesterday, when gentleness dropped its mask. When I reached my porch, the afternoon mail was tucked into the rusted metal box. A few catalogs, a water bill, a postcard from the library reminding me my book was overdue, and one envelope with my bank's logo in the corner. I held it for a second longer than necessary. Inside the house, the familiar hush greeted me, quiet, but not lonely. I set my purse on the table, hung my coat on the back of the chair, and sat down to read the bank letter. Account verification notice, it began. My eyesight wasn't what it used to be, but the words were sharp enough. We are writing to confirm the recent activity on your checking and savings accounts linked to the secondary authorized user. Secondary authorized user. Andrew. I read the sentence 3 times before the truth settled. My son had been making withdrawals, transfers, and routine adjustments under the authority I had apparently given him 2 years earlier. 2 years. My fingers tightened around the paper. The room felt suddenly too small, the walls too thin. Not because of fear. Fear shrinks a person. This was something else, something that made me sit up straighter. I picked up the phone and dialed the branch number. Mrs. Collins, the manager greeted, cheerful in a way bankers always are when they know your balance. What can we do for you today? I'd like to discuss the secondary access on my accounts, I said. Is it possible to cancel it? There was a brief pause. Yes, ma'am. You would simply need to come in for identification and sign the revocation forms. I almost laughed at the irony. Sign. They always wanted my signature. I'll be there today, I said, and hung up before doubt could creep in. It took me 30 minutes to reach the bank. The manager, Mr. Lyle, met me himself. Polite, efficient, a man used to handling people who didn't ask many questions. But today, I had questions. Mrs. Collins, removing your son from the account will stop any automatic transfers he initiated, including— Good, I said quietly. He cleared his throat. Some payments may fail as a result. That's his concern now. Mr. Lyle blinked. I don't think anyone had heard me speak that sharply in years. I signed each cancellation carefully, reading every line. My handwriting was slow but steady. Would you like new access cards issued? He asked. Yes, only in my name. When it was done, he handed me the completed forms in a neat packet. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I hesitated, then shook my head. Not today, but soon. Outside, the wind had picked up, tugging gently at my coat. Cars rushed down the street, one after another, people in a hurry to be somewhere, do something, sign something. I moved slowly, deliberately, clutching the packet from the bank like armor. At home, I placed the papers next to the untouched manila folder. 2 stacks, side by side. One representing what they'd tried to take, the other, what I had taken back. For a long moment, I simply stood there, hands on the table, breathing the quiet air of my own house. Then the phone rang. I didn't answer. Let it ring, I thought. Let it ring until the ringing teaches them patience. When it finally fell silent, I sat down in George's chair and allowed myself one slow breath. then another. The house felt different now, not safer, but more mine, as if each step I'd taken today had stitched me back into the life I'd once owned fully. There was so much left to do, so much they didn't know I knew. But tonight, for the first time in a very long while, I felt no rush. And that alone was a beginning. By late morning, sunlight had settled across my living room like a thin, hesitant blanket, warm only where it touched. I sat at the kitchen table with both folders in front of me, the bank documents neat and official, and the manila one Andrew had pressed into my hands with such urgency. Two choices, two versions of my future, separated by a single woman's spine. I reached for the phone but didn't dial. Calling Andrew would only invite another performance. Concern, confusion, the practiced irritation that always came when I slowed his momentum. No. It was time I spoke to someone who didn't need me to hurry. By noon, I was walking toward Daniel Holt's office again. My steps were slow, deliberate. The way one walks when reclaiming ground she didn't realize she'd ceded. When I stepped inside, his receptionist looked up, startled. "Oh, Mrs. Collins, you're back?" "Yes," I said, "and I'd like to speak with Mr. Holt, if he's free." She hesitated, then gave me that soft, pitying smile people reserve for the very old and the very stubborn. "Let me check." Within minutes, I was back in his office, the air humming with that same quiet steadiness I had noticed yesterday. "Mrs. Collins," Holt said, rising from his chair. "Did something happen?" "A few things," I said, handing him the bank packet. "I revoked my son's access to my accounts." He skimmed through the forms, nodding. "Good. That was the right step." "It was overdue," I answered. He didn't disagree. I sat, placing my hands on the table. They looked older today. Thinner skin, bluer veins, but I felt more solid inside them than I had in years. "I need to know," I said, "whether my son already has any legal claim to my house." He leaned forward. "As of yesterday's review, no formal transfer has been completed, but the documents he asked you to sign would have initiated one. So I was right to refuse." "You were lucky to refuse," he said gently. "Lucky." I didn't feel lucky. I felt awake. He continued, flipping through the papers. "Mrs. Collins, do you mind if I ask something personal?" I nodded for him to continue. "Has your son ever pushed you to sign medical or financial documents quickly, without explanation?" I felt my jaw tighten. "Often." "And did you read them?" "Not then," I said. "But I will now." His expression shifted. Not pity, not concern, but respect. It startled me a little. "Would you like me," he asked, "to draft a formal revocation of any prior authority your son may have verbally implied or referenced?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "And something else." He waited. "I want to ensure my house cannot be taken from me. Not by accident, not by persuasion, not by rushing." The corners of his mouth softened. "We can establish an ownership protection clause and file a notice ensuring no transfer can occur without independent verification from a legal representative." "Independent," I repeated, liking the word more each time. He took notes quickly, the scratch of his pen a steady, reassuring sound. "Once this is filed, no one, not even your son, can pressure you with last-minute paperwork." Relief didn't wash over me. It settled, quietly, like a warm shawl over my shoulders. "And one more thing," I added. "My will." He paused. "Do you want to change it?" "Yes, not today, but soon." "Of course." We spent another half hour reviewing every page of Andrew's documents. Not once did Holt ask whether I was overreacting. Not once did he suggest my age made me confused. He treated me not like someone fragile, but like someone returning to herself after being misplaced for too long. When I finally stood to leave, the weight inside my chest felt different, heavier in responsibility, lighter in helplessness. "Mrs. Collins," he said as I opened the door, "you're doing the right thing." I met his eyes. "I know." Outside, the wind tugged at me again, but this time, instead of pulling, it seemed to push, gently, like a reminder that forward was an option. When I returned home, the answering machine blinked red. 7 missed calls, all from Andrew, not Tammy. She knew better than to try her luck today. I didn't listen to the messages. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, set it beside the manila folder, and looked at the 2 stacks of documents again. Not with dread, with intention. Their rush had brought me here. My slowness would carry me forward. By the time evening settled over the house, I'd grown used to the blinking light on my answering machine. It pulsed in the dim room like a tiny, frantic heart. My son's heart, not mine. Mine beat slowly, evenly, with the clarity of someone who had stopped apologizing for breathing. I was stirring a pot of soup when gravel crunched outside. Headlights swept across the kitchen window. I didn't rush. I never rush anymore. By the time I wiped my hands and walked to the front door, Andrew was already on the porch, shifting from foot to foot like a man who had rehearsed a speech and forgotten it on the drive over. "Mom," he said the moment I opened the door, "why aren't you answering your phone?" Because silence, I had learned, was more honest than explanations. But I didn't say that. Instead, I stepped back. "Come in." He did, glancing around like the house might accuse him too. The manila folder was still on the coffee table, the bank packet beside it. He noticed immediately. His shoulders tightened. "Mom, what's all this?" he asked. I took my seat in George's chair and let the quiet fill the room before answering. "These are the documents you brought me. And the ones I signed at the bank today." His eyes widened. "You went to the bank without telling me?" "I'm 78, Andrew," I said, "not 7. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since boyhood. "Okay, but did you revoke my access?" "Yes." He blinked, stunned by the simplicity of the word, as though he expected a trembling explanation, a soft apology, a justification carved out of guilt. "Mom, why would you do that?" He laughed, too loud, too quick. "Was this Tammy? Did she say something wrong? She's been stressed? She didn't mean—" "I heard her," I interrupted. He froze. "I heard what she said yesterday. She'll sign anything if you rush her." I watched the words hit him like cold water. "I didn't, Mom. She didn't mean—" "She meant exactly what she said." For a moment, he didn't breathe. "Okay," he said finally, lowering his voice the way someone does when they want to regain control. "I should have explained the documents better. We just needed to streamline some accounts. And you've always said—" "I've always said yes," I corrected. He flinched. I gestured toward the table. "Sit." He did, slowly, like a man preparing to hear a verdict he hoped wouldn't come. "Andrew," I began, folding my hands, "what were these documents going to do?" He swallowed. "Nothing that would hurt you. It was just financial planning." "For whom?" He didn't answer. "Your name," I continued, "would have gained authority over my property." His eyes darkened. Not with guilt. Guilt is soft. This was irritation. The irritation of a man who believed he had been inconvenienced. "Mom," he said carefully, Do you have any idea how much responsibility we take on for you? The errands? The bills? The appointments? Tammy handles so much. Yes, I said, and she handles it quickly. He stared at me, confused by the calm in my tone. And rushing, I added, is useful when you don't want someone to read. Something hardened in his jaw. So you think I'd trick you? I think, I said gently, that you already tried. He stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. I can't believe you went to a lawyer behind my back. I lifted my eyes to him, slowly, deliberately. Behind your back, I repeated. Andrew, these are my accounts, my house, my signature. Nothing I do about them can possibly be behind your back. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Silence stretched. For the first time in a long time, I didn't fill it. Mom, he said finally, rubbing his forehead, you're making a mess out of something simple. No, I answered softly. I'm cleaning the mess I refuse to see. He stared at me then, really stared, like he was meeting a stranger in his mother's skin. I should go, he muttered. Yes, I agreed. You should. He walked to the door but paused with his hand on the knob. We're family, Mom. Don't turn this into a battle. I looked at him, at the worn edges of the boy I once raised, and the sharp, hurried man he had become. Andrew, I said, a battle starts when someone draws first lines. I'm simply stepping back from the ones you drew for me. He had no reply. He left without closing the door fully. I walked over and did it for him, the latch clicking softly into place. The house felt heavier afterward, but not with fear, with truth. And truth, I was learning, has weight, but it also has backbone. The house always grows quieter after a confrontation, as if the walls themselves need time to settle. I moved slowly through the living room, touching the back of the sofa, the corner of the old bookcase, the edge of George's chair, places where my life had gathered quietly, like dust in afternoon light. I wasn't trembling. I noted that with a strange sort of pride. Years ago, raised voices from Andrew would have left me flustered, apologetic, smoothing the air around him like a mother tries to calm a colicky child. But tonight, my hands felt steady. My breath felt steady. Only my heart, my old, stubborn heart, felt heavy. Not broken, just tired. I turned on the lamp beside the window. Its soft glow pooled across the rug, warming the room just enough to keep loneliness from settling too deeply. But it didn't warm the ache behind my sternum, the one that had nothing to do with age. I walked to the kitchen and poured boiling water over a tea bag, watching the strands of color unfurl. Slow, patient, refusing to be rushed. Perhaps I was becoming more like tea these days, stronger when given time. The house creaked as it cooled, familiar little murmurs I'd grown used to over decades. When George was alive, he used to say the house talked to us. To him, each groan in the floorboards meant weather was changing or the wind had shifted. To me, the sound simply meant we belonged here, together. Tonight, the house sounded different. Not unhappy, just aware. As if it sensed I'd finally begun protecting it again. I carried my tea to the small table by the window. Outside, the street was dim, the porch light spilling only a soft circle onto the walkway. The maple tree across the yard swayed gently, its branches like arms reaching out but not quite touching anything. For the first time since yesterday, the weight of everything settled into me fully. Not the legal worries, not the fear of losing my home, but the grief. The grief of realizing how far a mother can drift from her son without ever leaving his side. It wasn't sudden. Nothing painful ever is. It happens the way metal rusts, quietly, a little each season, until one day the hinge no longer holds. Andrew hadn't meant to become hard. Life does that to people in ways they don't notice. But Tammy, she'd given it permission, encouragement, and I'd made it easy. I took a sip of tea. It was too hot, but I didn't mind. There is a strange kind of loneliness that comes in old age. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of realizing you've been alone much longer than you knew. You wake up one morning, and the silence surrounding you has a history you never gave it credit for. My phone buzzed from across the room. Not a call, just a message. I didn't rush to it. I let it sit there, lighting up the dark like a restless thought. It buzzed again, then fell still. I didn't need to read it to know its tone. Apologetic, maybe. Or defensive. Or worse, practical. Pretending to soothe while asking for something. I let it stay where it was. Tonight wasn't for Andrew. Tonight was mine. I folded my hands around the warm cup, feeling the steam soften the dry skin across my knuckles. I breathed in slowly, letting the scent, bergamot and something floral I couldn't quite name, fill the hollow places that fear had emptied. For years, I told myself that love meant giving, and it does. But I'd forgotten the other half of that truth. Love also means stopping when giving becomes permission for harm. The tea cooled. My bones settled. The ache inside loosened enough to let air in. Maybe tomorrow the fight would resume. Maybe Andrew would come back with anger sharpened by Tammy's whispers. Maybe the next papers would be even more dangerous. But tonight, here in this small golden circle of lamplight, I felt something I hadn't known in a long while. Myself. Not the version they saw. Frail, slow, grateful for crumbs of patience. But the woman who had paid for this house, who had nursed a husband through his final winter, who had taught 30 years of children to read with courage, not fear. A woman who could still stand her ground. I finished my tea and rested the empty cup on the table. The house sighed softly around me, an old structure easing into the night. I whispered into the stillness, not to Andrew, not to Tammy, not even to George, to myself. You're not done yet, Marta. And I believed it. I woke before sunrise, not because age has thinned my sleep, though it has, but because something inside me had shifted. A quiet urgency, not the kind forced on me by Andrew and Tammy, but one that belonged entirely to me. The kind that arrives when truth is close enough to touch. The house was cold when I stepped into the hallway. Early light pressed through the curtains, pale and uncertain. I wrapped my shawl tighter and walked to the dining table, where the manila folder still waited. I had left it untouched for 2 days out of principle. This morning, I felt steady enough to open it again. Not to sign. To see. I spread the pages carefully, flattening each one beneath my palm. My eyes traced the text slowly, as if I were reading an unfamiliar language. But deception, I realized, is not complicated. It only pretends to be. On the 3rd page, something caught my attention. A signature. My name, written in a sweeping line I hadn't made in years. My handwriting had grown small, tight, careful. This signature was younger, confident. The M curved the way it used to when George was still alive, when my hands had more flesh than bone. I lifted the paper closer. No tremor in my fingers. Only certainty. I didn't sign this, I whispered. The house didn't answer, but it didn't need to. Forged. Tammy hadn't rushed me to sign. She'd rushed me so I wouldn't notice signatures that weren't mine. I stacked the pages, face down, and reached for the phone with a calmness that surprised even me. Mr. Holt answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Collins? Is everything all right?" "Yes," I said. "And no, I need you to see something." He heard something in my voice, something steeled, and told me to come in right away. The walk to his office felt shorter this time, though my steps were as slow as ever. Perhaps purpose shortens distance in ways feet cannot. In his office, he took the papers gently, like they were fragile. Then he examined the signature, compared it to the one on my bank documents, then back again. His eyebrows rose. "This isn't your handwriting." "I know." He turned the page slightly. "I believe this is a traceover. Someone used an older signature of yours as a guide." "Someone with access," I murmured. He nodded once, solemnly. "Mrs. Collins, this isn't an accident, and it isn't harmless." I sat back, letting the truth settle without rushing it. "What happens now?" "That depends," he said. "Do you want to pursue legal action for forgery?" I thought of Tammy's voice. Cool, clipped, always efficient. I thought of Andrew's irritation, sharp as flint. I thought of the years of quiet erosion, my boundaries wearing down grain by grain. "No," I said finally. "Not yet." He seemed relieved and concerned at once. "Then at the very least, we'll document this, and we'll take steps to ensure they can't use these papers against you." "Yes," I said. "Do that." He placed the forged document aside carefully. "Mrs. Collins, this is serious." "So am I." He exhaled slowly, studying me. "You're handling this with remarkable composure." I gave him a thin, tired smile. "At my age, Mr. Holt, panic is wasted energy." He nodded. When I stepped back outside, the sun had risen fully, warming the pavement beneath my shoes. I tightened my shawl and walked home with a new heaviness, but also a new clarity. They hadn't just tried to rush me, they'd prepared for me not to matter. As I reached my porch, I paused with my hand on the railing, the wood warming beneath my skin. "Well," I murmured into the quiet morning. "They're about to learn how badly they miscalculated." And I stepped inside. It was late afternoon when the knock came. Sharp, hurried, the kind of knock that doesn't wait for permission but expects compliance. I had just settled into my chair with an Afghan over my knees. I didn't get up right away. Let him wait, I thought. Let him learn the taste of stillness. But the knocking grew louder. "Mom!" Andrew's voice cracked through the door. "Open up. Now." Now. That word again. Always now. Never when I'm ready. I rose slowly, my slowness no longer a weakness but a choice, and opened the door. Andrew pushed past me without waiting. He looked different this time. Not irritated, not confused, but rattled. Truly rattled. "What did you do?" he demanded, breath quick, eyes darting around the room as if searching for evidence of betrayal. "I don't understand the question," I said calmly, closing the door behind him. He turned, waving a stack of papers I recognized immediately, the banker's packet. "My access was revoked. All my transfers were stopped. Do you know how many payments bounced today?" I walked to the table and sat down. If they bounced, they weren't mine to pay. His jaw clenched. "Mom, you can't just do that. Tammy and I have things set up, plans, responsibilities. And I don't?" He paused, momentarily thrown. I watched him with a kind of quiet sorrow. This was the boy I raised, and yet somehow, not at all. You involved a lawyer, he said finally, voice low with accusation. I called the bank. They said you signed revocations today, without notifying me. I'm not required to notify you about my own accounts, I replied. He ran both hands through his hair. This is insane. I've been handling your bills, your paperwork. And I'm grateful for the help you offered, I said. But I did not ask you to take ownership of my life. He scoffed. Ownership? Oh, come on. I reached for the manila folder and slid it toward him. Then explain these. He hesitated, then opened it. When his eyes landed on the forged signature, his face tightened, but not with guilt, with calculation. Tammy handled some of this, he said. Maybe the bank misplaced something. Maybe. Andrew. My voice was quiet, too quiet for him to ignore. Do not lie. Not to me. Not anymore. He closed the folder too quickly, as if the truth might spill out. You're blowing this out of proportion, he said. These documents would have helped us manage things better. It's what families do. It's what control does, I corrected. Something in his expression changed then, subtle but unmistakable. A flicker of anger, sharp and unfiltered, the kind you only show to someone you think cannot fight back. Mom, he said, leaning closer, you need us. You can't keep up with everything. You shouldn't be alone with all this responsibility. We were trying to help. You're making this harder than it needs to be. There it was. The soft voice people use when they want to take something, wrapped in concern so it feels like a gift. Andrew, I said, feeling my breath steady. I may move slowly, but I am not lost. I know exactly what you and Tammy were trying to do. His face flushed. We weren't trying to do anything except protect you. Then why, I asked, did you need me to stop reading? He froze, and for a long, silent moment, we just stared at each other, the old woman and the boy she raised, standing on opposite sides of a truth neither could ignore. Finally, he muttered, I should never have come. That may be the first honest thing you've said today. He grabbed his coat, stormed toward the door, and just before stepping out, he turned back, eyes sharp and wounded. You're making a mistake, he said. I already did, I replied softly. For years. He left without another word. The house settled again, tired, older, but somehow stronger. So was I. The letter came the next morning, tucked between a grocery flyer and a dental coupon, as though it were nothing more than paper. But paper can ruin a life as easily as fire, and the envelope had that heavy official weight I've learned to distrust. I took it inside, set it on the table, and stared at it longer than I should have. At 78, you don't rush bad news. You let it sit. You let it reveal its shape before you open it. When I finally tore the seal, the words on the page arranged themselves slowly, like a blow winding up before landing. Notice of concern regarding habitability and safety. Recommendation for relocation pending review. Relocation, a polite word for removal, not quite eviction, but its shadow. The letter claimed to be from a county assessor. It listed hazards in my home, loose porch steps, aging electrical wiring, mobility risks. Things real enough, but not new. Things Andrew had promised to fix when we get around to it. At the bottom, in finer print, it stated, a formal petition for mandated relocation may be filed by family or authorized advocates. Family. My hands went cold. They had started the process. Or Tammy had. It sounded like her. Polished concern wrapped around strategy. I sat down slowly, the letter trembling just slightly between my fingers. Not fear. Anger has its own tremor. Quieter, but deeper. I laid the paper flat and smoothed it with my palm, as though touch alone could make the words less cruel. So this is the next step, I murmured, not taking my house directly, not yet, but weakening my foundation, preparing the ground. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. The house shook faintly. For a moment, I felt as fragile as the window glass, old, stretched thin, one sharp vibration away from breaking. I closed my eyes. You don't get to break, I told myself. Not now. But breaking isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet sagging inside, like an old beam giving way. I felt that sag, heavy and undeniable, as though a long-held piece of hope had finally lowered itself to the floor. I stood and walked to the porch. The boards creaked beneath my weight. The assessor wasn't wrong. The wood was tired, but it had held me longer than my own son had. The air outside was sharp, slicing through the thin morning light. My breath caught, not from cold, but from the realization that hurt more than any threat to my home. They wanted me gone, not because I was unsafe, but because I was inconvenient. I sank onto the porch step, the one George always meant to repair, and folded my hands in my lap. My heartbeat felt unsteady, like it was searching for a rhythm that had gone missing. George, I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. I think they're trying to put me away. A crow in the maple tree croaked back, the only witness to my confession. For a long minute, I let myself feel the weight of it all, the loneliness, the manipulation, the steady erosion of trust. Grief settled over me like a thick wool coat, heavy enough to steal warmth. But even in that heaviness, something small flickered, thin, weak, but alive. Not hope, not yet. Resolve. A different kind of strength, the kind that grows only after something inside you quietly breaks and chooses to knit itself together anyway. I stood, slowly, using the railing for balance. The house groaned in sympathy. I ran my fingertips along the wood, feeling its roughness, its age. No one, I said aloud, voice steadying, gets to decide where I belong. The letter waited on the table inside, still sharp, still threatening. But I was not ready to be moved. Not by a son, not by his wife, not by a county office with a checklist. I had bent for them long enough. Now it was time to brace. The letter lay on the table like a challenge I hadn't agreed to, but would answer all the same. I read it twice more that morning, not because I doubted its meaning, but because I wanted the words to settle in me fully. A woman should never step into battle half awake. By noon, I had gathered everything I knew I would need: the forged signature, the rushed documents, the bank revocations, and now the relocation notice. I placed each item deliberately into a canvas tote, the same one I used for library books. Somehow, using it made the task feel less frightening and more methodical. The phone rang twice while I tied my scarf. I didn't answer. I let the machine catch it. Andrew's voice spilling out in clipped sentences, apologizing without apology, telling me he'd explain everything if I would just call him back. No explanations were needed, not anymore. I walked to Holt's office with the slow determination of someone who knows the ground may shake, but her footing won't. The receptionist looked up, eyes widening slightly at the sight of my bulging tote. "Mrs. Collins, Mr. Holt is finishing a meeting, but he can see you soon." "I'll wait," I said, lowering myself into the same leather chair as before. It no longer felt too soft. It felt earned. Holt emerged moments later, concern softening his features when he saw me. "Let's talk," he said gently. Inside his office, I set the tote on the desk and began laying out the papers one by one, like a quiet inventory of every line I had crossed to get here. "This arrived this morning," I said, sliding him the relocation notice. He read it, jaw tightening. "Mrs. Collins, this is not a routine assessment. Someone initiated this request." "I know." "And you believe—" "Yes," I said. "It was them." He placed the notice beside the forged document, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Two pieces of paper, different fonts, different seals, but identical in intent. "Then we proceed," Holt said at last, firmly. He took out a legal pad and clicked his pen. "First, we respond to this notice formally. Second, we file a preemptive protection order against any unauthorized transfer or petition regarding your residence. Third," he lifted the forged page, "we preserve this as evidence." I watched his hands move with quiet precision. Confidence. It made something inside me unclench. "Mrs. Collins," he continued, "you need to understand. What they're attempting requires coordination, planning. This isn't impulsive." "I understand," I said softly. "They've been preparing. I simply didn't notice." He met my eyes with a steadiness that reminded me of George at his best. Calm in a storm, not loud, not dramatic, just sure. "We'll protect your home," Holt said, "and we'll do it properly." I nodded, hands clasped in my lap. "What do you need from me?" "For now," he said, "honesty, documents, and patience. You've already shown more strength than most clients." Strength. I didn't feel strong. I felt awake and tired, but awake. He drafted letters while I watched, his pen marking each stroke with certainty. When he finished, he slid them toward me. "These are to be filed immediately. I'll have my assistant take them to the courthouse this afternoon." I picked them up carefully, reading each line, not rushing. When we were done, I tucked everything back into the tote, leaving behind only the forged document and the relocation notice. Holt pressed his hand gently to the papers. "These stay with me now," he said. "They're safer here." I nodded. Something inside me eased, as though the burden was no longer mine alone to carry. Walking out of the office, the wind brushed against my coat, cool and steady. The sky had turned a muted gray, but it didn't feel oppressive, just honest. As I reached my gate, I paused, one hand on the latch. The house looked different today. Older, yes, but no longer vulnerable. Supported, witnessed, protected. "So am I," I whispered. And I stepped inside, the door closing solidly behind me. The next morning, the first thing I noticed was the stillness. Not the usual morning quiet, but a deeper one, as if the house were holding its breath with me. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea, and the growing realization that I was no longer merely reacting to what Andrew and Tammy had done. I was preparing. Preparation, I've learned, is the opposite of fear. I opened my notebook, the same one I used for grocery lists and birthdays, and wrote 3 words at the top of a clean page: protect, remove, redirect. Simple, direct. Mine. By 10 o'clock, I was standing inside the bank again, my scarf pulled tight against the cold. The teller recognized me but didn't comment. That small mercy of adulthood. People assume age means routine. They rarely expect strategy. Mr. Lyle, the manager, approached with a polite smile. "Mrs. Collins, how can we assist you today?" I need to restructure my accounts, I said. Permanently. He gestured toward his office. Once the door closed, I placed my hands on the desk, steady as stone. I want a new account, separate from all previous access, and I want to transfer the majority of my savings there. He blinked. Of course. And for beneficiaries? Yes. I inhaled slowly. Not my son. Not his wife. His expression softened in a way I didn't care for. Something between sympathy and approval. But he didn't question me. Anyone else you'd like to name? He asked gently. I thought of the only person in our family who visited without an agenda, my granddaughter, Lily, a quiet girl with gentle hands and eyes that still looked at me like I was someone worth seeing. Yes, I said. Lily Collins. And, for the rest, charitable distribution. It felt strange saying it aloud. Even stranger realizing it didn't hurt. As we went through the forms, I read each line slowly, savoring my own authority. Not one page moved forward until I nodded. Mr. Lyle waited, silent, patient. He'd probably never seen anyone my age read anything so deliberately. When the transfers were complete, he printed final confirmation papers. Mrs. Collins, he said carefully, once this is processed, no previous agreements or authorizations will carry over. I know. And your son will no longer have access to these funds in any form. I know that too. He hesitated, then added, You're making strong choices. I met his eyes. I'm making overdue ones. Outside, the wind was fierce, tugging at my coat and reminding me I wasn't as strong as I used to be. But strength is never just in the body. Sometimes it's in the will. And mine felt newly sharpened. I walked home with slow, deliberate steps, the documents tucked safely inside my purse. The weight of them wasn't comforting, exactly, but grounding, like carrying the keys to a place you no longer fear losing. When I reached my front yard, the porch looked the same as always, weathered wood, peeling paint, familiar flaws. But something in me had changed. The house no longer felt like a fragile possession. It felt like a boundary I knew how to defend. Inside, the answering machine was blinking again. 3 calls this time. All from Andrew. I didn't listen. Instead, I went to my bedroom closet and retrieved the envelope that held my current will, creased, outdated, written in a different chapter of my life. I placed it on the kitchen table, then wrote a note across the front in firm, steady letters. To be replaced. Immediately. I didn't feel sad, not anymore. Sadness requires hope that someone will change. I was done hoping. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud, messy, exhausting. This was correction. Quiet, clean, and final. I heard the car before I saw it. Fast. Too fast for our quiet street. The tires crackled across the gravel. Then a door slammed hard enough to rattle my porch window. I didn't need to look to know who it was. There is a certain violence in hurried footsteps that only guilt produces. I was sitting at the dining table, the revised financial documents neatly stacked beside a cup of tea gone cold. I didn't get up. I let the footsteps come to me. The knock was not a knock. It was a demand. I opened the door with the same slow, deliberate calm I had worn like armor these past days. Andrew stood there, red-faced, tense. Behind him, Tammy hovered with a rigid smile, polished but stretched thin enough to show the teeth underneath. "Mom," Andrew said tightly, "we need to talk." I stepped aside. "Then come in." They entered like inspectors, eyes scanning the house as though looking for a weakness in the walls. On the coffee table lay an envelope I hadn't touched yet, the relocation notice from yesterday. Tammy's eyes flicked to it. Too quickly. She knew exactly what it contained. Andrew cleared his throat, producing a new set of documents from his jacket. These need your signature today. This whole situation has gone off the rails and we're trying to fix it before it gets worse. I sat down in George's chair, folding my hands in my lap like a woman preparing for a quiet sermon. What situation? I asked softly. Are you referring to exactly? This, Tammy said sharply, snatching up the relocation notice. Mom, this is serious. The county thinks your home isn't safe. They could force you out. We're trying to protect you. Are you? I said. Not a question. A recognition. Tammy's smile flickered. Of course. Why else would we be doing all this? To rush me, I answered, so I would sign things without understanding them. Andrew's jaw clenched. Mom, not this again. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. The forged signature. Tammy's breath hitched. Andrew's eyes darted away. They didn't need me to explain it. They recognized it instantly. Where did you get that? Tammy whispered. From the documents you brought me, I said. The ones you insisted I sign quickly. Andrew straightened, trying to recover ground. That is not what it looks like. This is a mix-up. It is exactly what it looks like, I interrupted gently. A signature I did not make. For a long moment, no one spoke. The house seemed to hold its breath again. Finally, Tammy leaned forward, voice tight and brittle. Mrs. Collins, you don't understand how complicated all this is. We were trying to keep things manageable. You don't need the stress of... Stress, I repeated quietly. Like a forged signature? Or a forced relocation request? Andrew's head snapped toward her. What relocation request? Tammy froze. My heart squeezed, not with triumph, but with grief. Watching the two of them, I saw how far they had gone separately, and how they had gone even farther together. Yes, I said. Your wife filed it. I didn't file. Tammy started, then stopped when she saw Andrew staring at her as though seeing her for the first time. He whispered, Tammy, what did you do? She said nothing. I lifted another sheet, Holt's preliminary response letter, crisp and authoritative. You no longer need to worry about the county, I told them. My lawyer has taken over. Any actions against my property now require independent review, and any attempt to transfer ownership without my consent is legally blocked. Andrew's face drained of color. Mom, why would you get a lawyer involved? We could have handled this privately. No, I said, my voice soft but immovable. You handled it privately for long enough. He swallowed hard. We're family. Yes, I said, we are. Which is why I let you handle things you had no right to handle, and why it stops today. Tammy's eyes flashed something between anger and desperation. You can't do this. I already have. Andrew stepped forward then, but there was something broken in his expression. Not anger this time, but fear. Fear of losing access, of losing control, of losing something he believed was his by default. Mom, he said, voice cracking. We were just trying to make sure everything was manageable. For you, I corrected. He didn't deny it. I lifted one final page, one they hadn't seen. My next appointment, I said quietly, is to rewrite my will. The silence that followed was absolute. Tammy looked away first. Andrew simply stood there, shoulders sagging as the truth settled over him like a weight he couldn't lift. You should go now, I said. They didn't argue. For the first time in years, They left my home without taking anything. The next morning felt strangely calm, the way a room feels after a storm has passed, but before anyone dares open the windows. I moved slowly through the kitchen, rinsing my teacup, wiping the counter, letting normalcy settle like dust. It wasn't peace, exactly. More like the quiet that follows a long-held breath. At 11 sharp, Mr. Holt arrived. I had never seen a lawyer on my porch before. His navy coat was neatly buttoned, his briefcase tucked under one arm. He smiled politely, but there was something solemn in the way he carried himself. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "may I come in?" Of course. When he stepped inside, he surveyed the room with the measured attention of a man who understands the gravity of what he's about to do. He set his briefcase on the table and clicked it open. "I've prepared the protective orders," he said, sliding a document toward me. "Your property is now fully insulated. Any attempt to transfer ownership, petition for forced relocation, or claim authority over your estate will require court approval and your explicit, documented consent." The relief I felt didn't rush through me. It settled slowly, like warm broth on a cold day. "And," he added, pulling out another envelope, this one heavier, stamped officially, "I've prepared the notice we discussed." I nodded. My hands were steady as I accepted it. A vehicle rolled up outside, engine too familiar to ignore. Andrew's car. I didn't flinch. Neither did Holt. The knock on the door was softer than before, cautious, controlled. "Mom, can we talk?" I opened it. Andrew stood there, shoulders slumped, as though gravity had doubled overnight. Tammy lingered behind him, lips tight, face pale but defiant. "Come in," I said. Holt rose from his seat but didn't step forward. He simply stood with the envelope in hand. Andrew's eyes darted between us. "Who is he?" "My attorney," I said. The color drained from his face. Tammy stiffened. "Mom, there's no reason for all this. We can figure things out. We can fix—" "Sit," I said quietly. They did. I took my seat opposite them, Holt beside me like a calm shadow. "Andrew," I began, "for the past several months, you and Tammy have been trying to gain legal control over my property, my finances, and my living situation. That's not—" "Don't," I said gently. "Not today." He swallowed hard. "I've spoken with Mr. Holt. We've documented the forged signature, the rushed documents, the relocation request." Tammy looked down quickly, guilt, or the closest she could come to it. "And today," I continued, "we're drawing new boundaries." Holt stepped forward and placed the official envelope on the table between us. "This," he said, "is a formal notification restricting any legal action regarding Mrs. Collins's estate, residence, or financial accounts, effective immediately." Andrew stared at it as though it were a snake coiled on the table. Tammy finally spoke, her voice thin. "So, what does that mean?" "It means," Holt said, "you no longer have the ability to initiate anything on her behalf. Not transfers, not petitions, not authorizations, nothing." Andrew ran a hand over his face. "Mom, please, you're making us look like criminals." I leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, just certain. "I am making you accountable." The difference hung in the air like a clean, sharp cut. Andrew's voice faltered. "We were trying to plan for your future." "My future," I said softly, "belongs to me." Tammy's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Holt closed his briefcase. "You've both been notified. Any breach of this order will result in legal action." Silence. Andrew looked smaller somehow. Not younger, just diminished. A man who had counted on his mother's softness and suddenly realized softness isn't the same as weakness. He stood slowly. I guess there's nothing left to say. There is, I said, rising with him. You may visit, you may call, but you will not manage me. Not one more form, not one more signature, not one more rushed explanation. His eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something like loss. Tammy turned away first. Andrew followed. At the door, he paused. Mom, we never meant for it to go this far. I nodded once. And yet, it did. They left without another word. When their car disappeared down the street, Holt placed a gentle hand on the back of my chair. You handled that with remarkable dignity, he said. I've had practice, I replied. He smiled softly. One part left. Yes, I said, feeling something quiet and triumphant unfold inside me. The will. Outside, the wind stirred the maple leaves. For the first time in a long while, they sounded like applause. The house felt different after they left. Not lighter, exactly, but honest. As though the walls had straightened their shoulders. As though the floorboards no longer braced for footsteps that brought tension instead of warmth. I spent the evening quietly, moving through my rooms with the kind of slowness that comes not from age, but from claiming space again. I touched the framed photograph of George on the mantel. I straightened the quilt on the back of his chair. I opened the curtains wider, letting dusk settle across the floor in long blue strokes. The world outside was calm. A dog barked somewhere down the block. A porch light flicked on. My maple tree rustled softly, as if reminding me it was still rooted, just as I was. The next morning, Holt picked me up himself. I didn't ask him to. He simply appeared at my door with a gentle nod and a quiet understanding. Some men know how to stand beside a woman without crowding her. At his office, he laid the new will in front of me. There's no rush, he said. Read every line. I did. Slowly. The words were clear, clean, free of assumption or obligation. My home remained mine for as long as I drew breath. My accounts controlled only by me. My beneficiaries chosen because of love, not expectation. There was no mention of Andrew or Tammy. Not out of spite. Not anymore. I discovered somewhere along this journey that anger is too heavy to carry forever. What remained was simply truth. And truth, when finally spoken aloud, becomes a kind of freedom. When I finished reading, I picked up the pen. My signature was small, a little shaky, but it was mine, fully mine. Holt collected the papers, sliding them into a protective envelope. You've done everything right, he said. I've done everything late, I corrected with a quiet smile. Late, he said, is still on time when it saves you. We drove back to my house slowly, the sky pale with early afternoon light. As I stepped onto my porch, I felt a strange sensation, a soft, quiet settling in my chest. Not triumph, not relief, belonging. For the first time in years, I belonged entirely to myself. Inside, I made tea. Not out of habit, but by choice. I drank it at the kitchen table while looking at the neat stack of documents Holt had helped me secure. My future, finally uncluttered. My boundaries, finally drawn in ink instead of hope. The phone didn't ring that day, or the next. It didn't matter. Some absences are blessings disguised as silence. Later, as evening crept through the windows, I stepped outside and stood on the porch, breathing in the cool air. The maple leaves whispered overhead, their shadows moving gently across the steps George never repaired. It occurred to me then, Old houses don't fall apart because they're worn. They fall apart because no one cares enough to keep them standing. I was still standing, maybe a little bent, a little slower, but standing nonetheless. I whispered into the quiet, "I'm not done yet." The wind answered, soft as a hand on my shoulder. And for anyone listening, any woman who has been hurried, silenced, overlooked, let this be the truth you hold close. You are allowed to slow down. You are allowed to draw lines. You are allowed to keep what is yours. And you are allowed at any age to begin again. If this story touched you, stay close. There are more truths to be told, one quiet breath at a time.